Today is all about a different side of the Marvel Universe, where we're talking about a team that plays in the shadows, that fights beneath the gritty, seedy underbelly of the rest of the Marvel Universe. Today is all about a team known as Midnight Suns. Thank you for watching JLS Comics. If you liked the video, hit the thumbs up and subscribe. I upload videos like this every week. Alright, let's jump into our story. Though the tale of the Midnight Suns begins in the third part of 1992, their publishing story actually begins nearly a decade earlier in 1983. 1983 marks the end of the second volume of Ghost Rider, hitting its last issue number of 81 that year. 7 years later, the editor-in-chief at Marvel at the time, a guy named Tom DeFalco, said, "Hey guys, we need to do a new Ghost Rider book." He must have realized before lead-in and creative time that they would very quickly be up against the upper bound time frame of the Ghost Rider trademark life and they'd have to renew it, and the way to reset the trademark time frame is to make a new book with that name. So then Howard Mackie came back with an idea for two Ghost Rider titles, one called Ghost Rider and one simply called Blaze. But as former Marvel editor Bobby Chase tells it, Blaze sounded too much like a movie about a stripper. On the other side of the bullpen by this time, the X-Office was having much success with the relaunched and reworked X-Men books. So with that in mind, they came up with the idea to take the mystical, occult side of Marvel and create their own team, and to also create an interwoven, easily crossed over mini-universe unto themselves, but which were still part of the larger main Marvel universe, a la the X-Men titles. Bob Harris, the editor on the X-Men title, said to Bobby Chase, "You want to have a family of books." Meanwhile, Len Wein and Tom DeFalco were trying to get a Morbius title up and running, and so they suggested bringing Morbius to their new family of books, and then around Christmas of 1990, Bob Harris suggested Hannibal King from Tomb of Dracula. At the same time, Chris Cooper had already submitted a Darkhold proposal to Marvel's Special Projects Committee, which was approved, and then Tom DeFalco said they could add it to the new line. They then pulled in Dan Chichester to do a Night Stalkers title as well, after seeing him kill it, pun intended, with a Daredevil Ghost Rider story. They decided as well to combine the Ghost Riders into the Spirits of Vengeance, so they'd have both Danny Ketch and Johnny Blaze in one book. This all hit DeFalco's desk in July of the next year, and he loved it, and so they hit the ground fleshing out the stories and how to come up with an intertwined villain, and that villain, they decided, would be Lilith. And it was all a success. The Midnight Suns debuted to much fanfare in the summer of 1992. This was the same year, mind you, that Carnage, Omega Red, Spider-Man 2099 debuted, that Cable would seemingly shoot Professor X, that DC would kill Superman at the hands of Doomsday, that Valiant came out with Bloodshot, Riot, Harbinger, and the year that Image Comics burst onto the scene with Youngblood and Spawn. It was the perfect time for a new, gritty, edgy line from Marvel to help compete for market share in a suddenly very crowded market. But their in-story beginning is not in 1992, it's not in 1983, but millennia ago. In an age before the great cataclysm, when the gleaming city of Atlantis was still above the waves. No, we can go further back, billions of years, to the birth of the Darkhold. The Darkhold is an ancient compendium of magic and occult knowledge, and this esoteric preternatural text was formed by the demon Chthon, and called the Chthon Scrolls. He wrote these in the caverns below Wundagore Mountain, which were a system of tunnels called the Darkhold. These scrolls were later bound by the daughter of an Atlantean named Morgan Le Fay into an ancient codex, a grimoire of forbidden knowledge, and that tome came to be called the Darkhold. With their ties to the cosmos, Atlanteans had powers and access to magic into the gods. They had powerful wizards and mages and witches amongst them. At one point, Tulsa Doom and his followers found the Darkhold book and used its ancient evil power for themselves, and they called themselves the Darkholders, one of whom was named Vernay. After King Cole fought with Tulsa Doom, the Darkholders turned Vernay into a vampire, the first of the undead. Vernay is the one who first possessed the antidote to the Darkhold, a magical book called the Book of Vishanti. Another of these residents was a lady named Lilith. Lilith had many children called, collectively, the Lilin. The more children she birthed, the more powerful Lilith became. At one point, the sorcerers of Atlantis trapped Lilith inside a giant kaiju named Tiamat. And there she remained for centuries, inside the massive Leviathan, but still using her own magic to influence the outside world where she could. Eventually, the Celestials and Deviants warred on the planet, Atlantis sunk, and Lilith was forgotten with time. However, Lilith's children, now demonic entities, were spread across the world, through the cosmos, and through many dimensions. In the 2006 Ghost Rider series, Moloch Bai-Jing, the Chinese spirit of vengeance, Sister Sarah, last of the caretakers, and Johnny Blaze went to Africa, somewhere along the Congo River, to the City of Skulls, last bastion in the war against Ketch and Heaven's Marauders. We learn from Moloch that he served with Baron Skullfire ages ago in the old order of the Midnight Suns. In those early days, there were entire legions of spirits of vengeance, but over time their ranks had been culled down to a select few. And then in the present day, the spirits of vengeance, Johnny Blaze and Danny Ketch, were hunting down Lilith's progeny, the Lilin, and killing them one by one. Lilith was aware that there were 9 mortals who were prophesized to oppose her rule. Those 9 would be the Midnight Suns. Their mother, the mother of all demons, Lilith, was not happy, and her wrath was about to unfold. The event called Rise of the Midnight Suns was previewed in Howard Mackey and Joe and Andy Kubert's Ghost Rider issue 25, with the tale officially kicking off in issue 28 from the summer of '92 and opens with an ominous setting. It says, "For eons, the walls between our earth and the supernatural realms have held fast until now. Now those walls are weakening and Lilith, Queen of Evil, Mother of Demons, has risen from her slumber to shatter the walls and free her hellish spawn. Only the strangest of allies can drive her back, a union of old enemies and new heroes, in a battle to be forever remembered." We meet Danny Ketch as Ghost Rider, cutting a swath of vengeance through the guilty underworld. He was ready to kill 2 crooks for killing an old lady when Johnny Blaze showed up to stop him, leveling his pump shotgun that shoots hellfire right at Ghost Rider's blazing skeletal face. Together, the 2 spirits of vengeance rode out on bikes, the guilty chained up on their gas tanks, and they took them to a cemetery in Cypress Hills. Ghost Rider was punishing the guilty with his penance stare and throwing them in a tomb, a cold stone mausoleum right next to one of Lilith's Lilin, a horrific demon known as Blackout. He too was trapped in the mausoleum. Johnny Blaze confronted Ghost Rider again, frustrated. Blaze was there to try to help save Danny Ketch. You see, in a previous issue, Danny as Ghost Rider was in a battle with Blackout, and his throat was ripped out, so he had to stay as Ghost Rider, because if he changed back to Danny, back to human, without his throat, he would die. But then, just after meeting the mysterious caretaker, Danny was in fact about to die, to pass into the light. But he saw a vision of Lilith and her Lilin in the flames, an unholy harbinger of doom. And he was sent back to Earth, and as NYPD SWAT and detectives surrounded the cemetery, Blackout escaped from the mausoleum. Caretaker helped Ketch and Blaze escape the police via the network of tunnels under the cemetery. On the other side of the cemetery grounds, Ghost Rider was again struck with the pain of the Lilin, and he said, "Evil greater than any this Earth has seen in a millennium." A sorcerer detected the magic use, and in the cold rainy night, Dr. Strange, the Sorcerer Supreme, showed up to talk to the caretaker. He knew what was coming, but he couldn't get involved, and Caretaker replied, "I just don't think the 2 bikers are enough." Dr. Strange replied, "They'll have help." So the 2 bikers rode out with the tires of their mystical motorcycles alight with the hellfire and the blue and red light of the NYPD squad cars behind them illuminating the rain, cutting daggers through the night air on the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway. The 2 riders parked on top of the Brooklyn Bridge, and as Blaze threatened to quit, Ghost Rider stared into his eyes to let him see the vision of Lilith that he'd seen. Meanwhile, in northern Greenland, 2 scientists were braving the frozen wastelands of the Arctic, an area known as the Land of Midnight Sun, to reach the site where an ancient Leviathan had risen from its icy tomb. The very same Leviathan which had held Lilith back from the breach for untold centuries. The body of the Leviathan was pierced and ripped open, and the scientist named Adam was killed as a creature in ghostly white emerged. Lilith, the demon mother, was reborn. Lilith summoned her children, but only Pilgrim, a being with the power to create portals, was able to appear. So the 2 of them went out into the world to gather the rest of her Lilin. They went to New York City and linked up with Creed and Blackout, and now she had 3 of her Lilin with her. Blaze went back to the carnival he was running to see his family with Ketch close behind. That's when the Lilin attacked the carnival. The demon spawn stole Craig, one of Blaze and Roxanne's kids, and took him away through Pilgrim's portal. But Ghost Rider and Blaze caught up with him, and Pilgrim demanded a life for Lilith. But Blaze wanted his son back as he talked over the barrel of his hell gun. Creed ripped Ghost Rider apart, and so Blaze shot his head off with hellfire. Ghost Rider recomposed himself while Blaze gathered his son from the undead, headless demon spawn. And Ghost Rider then turned to Blackout, and they fought. But Pilgrim portaled them back to Lilith before he could lose the battle to the Ghost Rider. Now Blaze was angry, he was livid. He sent his family away for protection and then raised his shotgun, the cigarette still smoking, as he bogarted it from atop his motorcycle and said, "Ghost Rider, let's go find us some demons." That proverbial flame was alit beneath him. Blaze's friend had a vision and sent them to the Paramount Hotel, room 616, in New York City to meet Martine Bancroft. This was the same New York that was the lair of Lilith and the feeding grounds of Morbius, the living vampire. Ghost Rider and Blaze met up with Martine Bancroft, and she's the one who told them about Morbius. While Morbius was nearly killed with Dr. Langford's serum, and then Martine was murdered. Lilith remotely looked on with her Lilith's sight, and as Morbius the vampire escaped her grasp, she turned to Victoria Montesi. Victoria's father, Vittorio Montesi, was a priest with ties to the Darkhold. It was the Montesi family who was charged with safeguarding the world from that terrible tome, the Book of Sins, the Darkhold. But Lilith wanted it. In Italy, the Darkholders' cult, dressed like a ninja clan, assaulted Victoria Montesi, hoping to find the Darkhold. The attack prompted her to leave and to go back to America, and there she headed to New York. Little did she know, this was the new battleground of an unholy war. Lilith wanted the Darkhold to return the demon Chthon's children from exile so she could love them as she loved her own, and they could serve her and grow her power. In New York, Victoria went to a crime scene at Donald Walsh's estate on Long Island to investigate, and there they met up with Vicky's friend, Professor Hastings. At the estate, they found a page from the Darkhold itself, a page given to Walsh by a creature named the Darkhold Dwarf. The spell on the page promised immortality, but the catch was that you would live forever, but as a swarm of worms. And when the worms that used to be Walsh attacked, Ghost Rider and Blaze crashed in through a giant window, having been called by Professor Hastings to help. That night, after the worm swarm regathered itself, the team ran into a park and ran right into Lilith, her Lilin, and the katana-wielding Darkholders clan. In the confrontation, the worms were assaulted by a murder of hungry crows. Blaze took the chance to fire a hellfire round at Lilith, which slammed into her shoulder, and so Lilith and her forces retreated back through another portal. Then Ghost Rider and Blaze targeted one of the Lilin named Nakota, and at the witching hour in the dead of night, they trapped her as Nakota begged for a merciful end. Ghost Rider held her up by her neck and with empty sockets ablaze, forced the penance stare upon the demon spawn. Through Nakota's eyes, they were able to see that Lilith was after 3 men in Boston. 3 of the 9 prophesied to oppose her. Those 3 were vampire hunters, Frank Drake, Hannibal King, and Blade. 3 hunters brought together by Doctor Strange to form a team called the Night Stalkers, a team tasked with taking out all vampires with a Darkhold spell called the Montesi Formula. Ghost Rider and Blaze once again rode out in the night, bikes aflame with the fires of hell. Also in Boston were Lilith, Meat Market, and her other Lilin, hunting on Boston Commons for flesh and meat to consume. Lilith walked into Borderline Investigations in a disguise, which was the firm run by Blade, Drake, and King, and she hired them to go after Ghost Rider and Johnny Blaze on her behalf. Little did they know the 2 spirits of vengeance were already bearing down on their city. The Night Stalkers went to MIT to get their armaments, nanotech-powered necrotech weapons. Blade, though, as his name suggests, was happy just wielding his swords and edged weapons. The forces of the Midnight Suns and the forces of Lilith collided and clashed at Old North Church in Boston. Ghost Rider tried to hit Blade with a penance stare, but he put his sword between them, and the power of the stare was reflected back at Ghost Rider, who collapsed, clutching his face in agony. The Lilin named Meat Market showed up, and they realized that they'd been set up just as Meat Market was swarmed by a mischief of rats. Blade finished his death, separating Meat Market's head right from his body. Then Doctor Strange confronted Lilith on the wooden deck of the USS Constitution, telling her that if they fought directly, it would further weaken the veil between realms, and it would allow her to summon more of her kind, and he would not allow that to happen. Lilith was distraught at the loss of her 2 Lilin, so she had Pilgrim transport them back to the Arctic land of the Midnight Sun, the place of her resurrection, and the place she chose as the site for their final battle. So rallying his forces, Doctor Strange went to Michael Morbius and sent him through a portal to Greenland to join the rest of the Midnight Suns team. And finally, the entirety of the Midnight Suns were gathered together as one. Lilith was trying to use the Leviathan carcass to create an interdimensional rift, and so the Midnight Suns charged. A massive battle erupted. Lilith ended up creating a rift in her own chest, and Ghost Rider lifted Lilith right above his head and told her that it was her own power that would be her undoing. She was sucked through the rift in her own body, collapsing in on herself, and Lilith was defeated under the light of the Midnight Sun. Then Doctor Strange appeared and revealed that he brought them all together, that there was mystical power in their numbers. All 9 of them were needed, as was foretold in the prophecy, and thus ended the rise of the Midnight Suns. In April of 1993, the team got their own self-titled 9-issue series, and the series focused on the team going after missing pages from the Darkhold to protect the mortal realm while balancing their own pain, their own balance of sin and salvation, their own flames of hellfire which pierced the dark shroud of night's blackness. During this time, there was another event called Midnight Massacre, and Blade continued to go after people with those black envelopes holding curses inside. Blade read one of the missing Darkhold pages, and he was transformed from Blade to Switchblade. Now Blade would absorb the supernatural powers of all those slain by his hand, and it was the other Midnight Suns who had to stop Switchblade and turn him back into their friend Blade. Blaze joined up with the Night Stalkers to stop him, while Montesi and Hastings continued going after the Darkhold pages on their own. Later, it was Jack Russell, the werewolf by night, who found Morbius, and they too were pulled into the fight, as well as Demogoblin, who showed up to help stop Blade. Switchblade killed Johnny Blaze, Demogoblin, Werewolf by Night, Modred the Mystic, Victoria Montesi, Morbius, and Hannibal King. And that just left Ghost Rider, Louise Hastings, and a warrior priest named Sam Buchanan from a group called the Darkhold Redeemers, who were left to stop the rampaging vampire hunter Switchblade. Switchblade went after Doctor Strange in the Sanctum Sanctorum, as that was the location of most of the unholy Darkhold. And there, Switchblade went for the Darkhold, but Ghost Rider interfered, and Switchblade used Johnny Blaze's shotgun to rip Ghost Rider apart. He impaled the rider's skull with a knife and then absorbed his hellfire, penance stare, and the very essence of the spirit of vengeance. Possessing that spirit of vengeance inside of himself was nearly too much for Switchblade, and he collapsed. And when he collapsed, it allowed Hastings to grab the Book of Spells and find the counterspell powered by Chthon himself, and this brought all their allies back to the world of the living once more. However, the Nine were now fractured, and this split was sensed by the forces of darkness, from the soulless man Centurius to the Darkhold dwarf to Lilith, who remained in the Arctic where she grew fat, feasting on the bodies of the Leviathan and her babies. The Midnight Suns gathered yet again for a siege of darkness. Ghost Rider and Blaze thought that they'd kill Lilith and Zarathos along with her Lilin, but what happened was that they'd opened a portal to Shadowside. So Ghost Rider and Morbius split them into two teams. One team went after Lilith and her Lilin, and the other went after Zarathos and his followers called the Fallen. Lilith was sent to Shadowside, while Zarathos was turned to stone. At the end, Caretaker said that they were the new iteration of the Order of the Midnight Suns, inheriting the title from the original team. They were branded with a symbol to reflect this new order. In 2009, the Midnight Suns gathered in an alternate reality called Marvel Zombies 4. This team was Morbius, Werewolf by Night, Damon Hellstrom, Man-Thing, and Jennifer Kale. They had to rally to fight against hordes of extra-dimensional zombies, superhuman undead, through an agency called Armor that Michael Morbius worked for. It's a story that also involved Black Talon, Simon Garth, and a zombie Deadpool. Much later, Victoria Montesi, representing the children of the Midnight Sun, bankrolled a federal agent named Claire Dixon, who had stood up an anti-carnage task force. Claire had then recruited Werewolf by Night and Eddie Brock with the Toxin symbiote to her task force. Carnage, it was prophesied, was the Red Slayer, and he wanted to use an altar guarded by the Daughters of Chthon to fulfill the prophecy, as it was written in the Darkhold itself, but they managed to stop him. After the events of Secret Empire ravaged America and ruined Las Vegas, Doctor Strange decided to use his magic to bring people back from the dead. Powerful magic, which both gives and takes. The blowback, the taking, was that Mephisto had raised an ugly black spire in the City of Sin, Las Vegas, called Hotel Inferno, and he was locking souls away in the vault of his hotel. So Benedict Wong and the ghost of Doctor Strange's basset hound named Bats summoned yet another iteration of the Midnight Suns to the Sanctum Sanctorum. This new team was Benedict Wong, Blade, Ghost Rider, Moon Knight, Dr. Voodoo, Iron Fist, Man-Thing, and Elsa Bloodstone. They headed to Vegas to battle Mephisto and his demonic forces. That's where Ben Reilly the Scarlet Spider also happened to be, and he too joined them for the battle. The Spirits of Vengeance, the Vampire Hunters, Victoria, and her renamed Darkhold Redeemers, Doctor Strange, and others are still out there on the front lines, battling back the forces of evil, the things that go bump in the night, so good people like us can sleep easy at night. Where will they show up next? A new book? An MCU movie? A Disney Plus series? We'll have to wait and see. Until then, that's a wrap on this one, my friends. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and you'll be one of the first to know when I upload videos just like this every single week. I'm Jesse, this is JLS Comics, and I'll see you soon.